Hello everyone. Today is another video for talking about the matchups. Well, not really the matchups, but how to team build with Bug in particular in Gen 8 monotype. So, what we'll be doing is basically taking a look at Bug as a type, figuring out how it works, and figuring out how we can make different kinds of sets for it so that we don't end up all looking like the same sample team that we see on the forums. So, without further ado, let's take a look. Well, first we're going to look at this replay of me. Well, we're not going to look at the actual replay, but we're just going to see that I have used some unusual mods and on teams. This isn't exactly a good replay of that, but like on most of the sets I use, I'm not exactly like I don't use the most common sets. So, for example, my Santa Scorch is actually no, never mind. This is actually a standard team. It's just that Galvantula has Thunder Wave instead of Sticky Web on this team. But regardless, I can still tell you because I have used a lot of D-rank mons in the past, and I do know how to like build effectively with the type and make like really heat teams. A lot of people call them BS, but they're generally very niche. Not niche, but like they're very unique options. And I'll teach you how to do that in a bit. So first, viability rankings. If you looked at the video previously, I'm going to recommend that you look at that first. Hopefully in its entirety. You don't have to look at it in its entirety because I get that 30 minutes is a lot, but I still highly recommend you look at that video if you want to like follow a lot of the basics that I'll be skimming over. But first of all, we're going to look at sample teams. So the sample team for this team is pretty straightforward. I have it in my builder right here. So it's just Struggle with Mental Herb and Final Gambit with Physically Defensive, Galvantula with extra webs coverage and agility to help with the water matchup. We have Coil or Set to Scorch here with Fire Lash, Leech Life, Power Whip, and Flash Fire with heavy duty boots. Durant, First Impression, Iron Head, Superpower, Rock Slide, Life Orb Hustle. We have heavy duty boots, Spike Stacking, Gliscopod, and we have heavy duty boots, Quiver Dance, Rybombe. Now you might be seeing that this is actually really similar to the team I used on my episode of D-Rank Warriors for Vikavolt. And that's because, well, I had to use the sample, and because Vikavolt just fit perfectly over the Galvantula slot. And Vikavolt was actually able to provide somewhat of an advantage without giving up too much. And it didn't really need that much additional support because Gliscopod and Rybombe already helped it out immensely. So you didn't really need to do much in that regard. But let's say you didn't want to have your team look like all the samples that are running around on the ladder. Let's say you want to be more unique. Well, we can do that. It's just that you have to first look at the viability ranks. But now that we know what the standard team is, we know what we want to stray away from. But yeah, an example of me straying away from the norm is I changed the set on my team. So I changed the set on my Galvantula. Instead of it being Focus Sash, I gave it Magnet, which honestly still hasn't saved me a ton in the games I've played. It definitely does give it a little bit more power, because this Pokemon is very, very weak, despite what you may think, but its fully powered Thunders. It has like a 97 special attack, which is not very good. Under 100 is really, really not good. And it has to rely on its high base power Thunder to actually hit really hard. And Energy Ball, this thing just does not OHKO a lot of the water grounds that this thing hits. So yeah, it's just not very strong at all. And I feel like the extra power given it to it by Magnet actually helps it out quite a bit with the neutral, especially with neutral hits with Thunder, which is what I was mainly going for with this. But I think Expert Belt is probably the more ideal set, or the more ideal item to use. But yeah, that's how I deferred this set from the standard norm, and it does do its job pretty decently. It does hit harder than the normal Galvantula set, and also I use Thunder Wave to slow down opposing threats that can't be hit by webs. For example, flying types, like a Noivern, for example. Noivern, Gyarados, Charizard, all those guys get slowed down by Thunder Wave, and that would be better on the Sash set, but the problem with using the Sash set is that literally rocks will probably be down on you because Shuckle doesn't exactly stop rocks from coming up, and you don't have a defogger to get rid of it. So you just end up having to hold those rocks, and there's not really much you can do about it. So Galvantula Sash just essentially becomes useless. That is, unless you use Galvantula as a lead, and that's fine in its own right. You can do that, but I personally don't like using Bug in that way, and it doesn't really fit my playstyle very well, so that's why I have Galvantula as a more offensive Pokemon. And it still does work, as you saw against the one guy, it still did work. So we're just going to go over a little bit now as to how we can defer even more from the standard sample team. But first we have to know what is good on Bug. So what mons do we keep, and which mons do we think about changing around? Let's go look at the viability rankings. So we see that Durant and Juggalo are both invaluable Pokemon that we definitely should not get rid of. Or at least consider getting rid of, unless they really, really hamper the team. Just try and keep these Pokemon on your team if you can. The A ranks, you might be able to change them around, but they're still pretty good. And now B rank and below is where you can start thinking like shifting around sets and stuff. So like for our B ranks, we have two pretty nice Pokemon. We got Centiskorch and Crustle. And Crustle is actually a pretty decent Shell Smasher. The only problem with it is that it's really, really slow. And thankfully, Shuckle supports him really well by being able to lay down webs, which slows down most of those threats that usually it gets outsped by after a Shell Smash. So that's why Crustle is actually, in particular, pretty good. But still, against flying types, it's just not that strong, actually. And even with Rock Blast as its stab, it's still not that good. It uses Rock Blast and Stone Edge if you want, but most people use Rock Blast because it helps destroy stubs, which is very, very good for Bug because Bug can get kind of set up on a little bit. And also it helps a lot with like breaking down Sturdy for certain Pokemon as well, so that's why Rock Blast is typically used. But Crustle in particular is just a very underwhelming Pokemon in general, which is really sad because I really do like this thing, but it's not the best. So you have to really consider that when you're using Crustle. If you're gonna use this, don't depend on this thing to win matchups on its own. If you want to have a better matchup against Flying, I'd suggest using Galvantula along with it, or even using Frostmoth with it, because it needs that additional support in that matchup, because it can't do it on its own. Otherwise, you're just setting yourself up for failure. Also, yeah, you might need a rock move on Durant as well if you want to support this. So next up we have our C ranks, and our C ranks are like very matchup dependent. So we could use Araquanid if we're really struggling with like ground and dealing with attackers like Chandelure. We could use Frostmoth if we really, really hate ground, like really, really hate ground, and we just want to use ice. And also you can use Frostmoth as like a suite bulky setup sweeper. Thanks to its ice scales ability, which basically makes it like a really fat, especially defensive tank that can literally set up on like a lot of special attackers. Unfortunately, it's just not that fast, even after Quiver Dance. Same problem with Crustle. It's just not that fast. Even with web support, it still can't like outspeed a lot of things, and just ends up, and because of its offensive power just isn't that threatening even after a Quiver Dance, it still ends up getting like forced out even after a Quiver Dance, and it's really, really, really sad. So that's why this thing is C rank, but it can still put in a lot of work if given the right opportunities and the right setup with your team. Next up we have Golisopod, we already talked about that, and Orbeetle, who can run a support set that's not particularly the best, but allows Galvantula to free up its slots, and also Orbeetle can run like a really nasty CM Iron Defense stored power set, which can sweep most teams without a dark type. And well, Bug can actually get away with this a little bit because you pretty much destroy dark naturally. You might not have Heracross, but you still have Ribombee, who obviously you're going to be using Orbeetle with, because without Ribombee, you're kind of risking the dark type coming out too much. So that's why you need Ribombee. If you're going to use Orbeetle. And that's the main thing I want you guys to take away from this. Certain Pokemon are going to require you to have another Pokemon with them in order to support them properly. But that being said, not all Pokemon are run the exact same way. So, like, let's go back to that sample team. So, ignoring this sample team could have a few different sets. Sure, this is like the standard. This is easy to use. There's nothing really wrong with these sets. These sets are all fine. But what if you want to be a little bit more spicy? So let's use one of the suggestions I said before, which is instead of making this sticky web, just make this thunder wave to hit flying types. And thanks to Compound Eyes, you will never ever miss thunder wave, so that's really good. And yeah, you can use thunder wave, or you can even use volt switch if you want additional pivoting power. But I'd only use volt switch if you have like really powerful hit and run attackers that would really benefit from it. So like Golisopod and Durant are very good examples for this actually. So Volt Switch could actually be viable on this team, but like for harder hitting stuff like if Sizor was in this tier, for example, if you were using Choice Band Sizor, Volt Switch would definitely be a very good option like Evangela in this metagame. But aside from that, there's not really like a ton you can do without deferring from like Evangela's normal moves. You could use like Bug Buzz if you really want to use your stab, or even go like all out offensive with Galvantula and just go Life Orb with a Bug Buzz and Volt Switch as well. You can do that, but you have to note that it may not work out the best for you, and especially because Galvantula is just meager offensively. Don't expect this thing to break walls, but it can still do work. Especially if it's in front of like a water team, because that's where it really, really excels. So you might want to still use agility just to make sure you like outspeed things like Swift Swim, Seismitoad, for example, just to make sure you OHKO those things properly with Energy Ball. But yeah, also we have Centiskorch, who can also run a few different moves. Even though it won't differ much from its Fire Lash, Leech Life, Power Whip roots, Coil can actually be passed up for a few other moves like Knockoff, but that's pretty much all the variety you can get out of him, because he's pretty straightforward and he's really good at what he does. If you're trying to like use like Rest Talk, I've seen on a couple of teams, you need like an immense amount of support. Like you need someone with aromatherapy essentially, or you need like another Pokemon that could like come in, and Bug cannot support that kind of playstyle because it's similar to fighting, where you actually are forced to run an offensive playstyle because you don't have good defensive Pokemon. And because of your lack of good defensive Pokemon, even with heavy duty boots being a factor, most of your premier defensive Pokemon just aren't in this metagame. So like Fortress and I don't know any other bulky bug Pokemon, like Armaldo, I guess. Like those two aren't in the game like at all. So you just kind of have to deal with what you have, and you have to be as offensive as possible. So you can't really rely on something coming in and making sure that everything is all right. So you have to be as offensive as possible. Um, Next up we have Durant. Durant actually has a lot of variety it can use. So depending on his team, Durant can actually drop or even pick up a few new moves, because Durant can just run like a variety of sets in my opinion, especially on Bug. Because even though First Impression kind of made it a little bit more linear in my opinion, you can still get away with running some of his old sets, even though First Impression is still really, really good, and you probably should still use it because it's very good. But you can resort to his old ways and just have like Hone Claws, X Scizor, for example, Hone Claws X Scizor with Iron Head and Superpower. Or you can even drop Hone Claws, go back to First Impression, and you can use like something like Stomping Tantrum. Oops. Stomping Tantrum, for example. And Stomping Tantrum is actually pretty good because you can actually do some outplays with First Impression failing, and then you can use Stomping, like an 150 base power Stomping Tantrum, which is like, that's really, really nice. And it's a pretty niche situation where you'd have to use that, but if you ever do end up having to do that, it's pretty nice synergy. So that's why I think you should use First Impression with Stomping Tantrum. because I feel like it's just a little bit of synergy that will be greatly appreciated. Also, you can switch up his items. You can also put expert belt if you're not a fan of life orb chip, or you can even make it a hidden run attacker with a choice band, because it's not going to be setting up, obviously. And that way you allow yourself to punch holes better with first impression, and also destroy weakened Pokemon with it. Because before, I would say last gen, your strongest priority was Sizor, and that could get like walled by well, actually, it's by other steel types, but first impression also gets walled by that. But, like, point of matter is, he was your only source of priority. Like, no other Pokemon really ran priority on Bug. Now, Durant and Golisopod both offer a lot of priority, and because their priority is so good, you even if Scizor comes back, I still see these two Pokemon probably coming back, and that's why I feel like you can get away with a Choice Band set, because if Scizor can get away with spamming priority boosted moves, Durant can also do the same thing, because that's essentially what this accomplishes. It's basically kind of sort of the same mod, but not really. But yeah, that's it for Durant. You can also run Thunderfang if you want to hit Toxapex. Or you can also use Stone Edge if you're really feeling the risk, because Stone Edge gets even more inaccurate, and you already probably don't hit Stone Edges, so trying to risk hitting Stone Edge on top of Hustle is a really big gamble, and I personally would not recommend ever running Stone Edge on this mon, unless you're really feeling lucky, but it's up to you. Uh, But yeah, that's pretty much all you can run on this mod. You can also run a setup set, as I mentioned before. Hone Claws or Sword Stance, doesn't matter. You have a lot of options with a Durant. It just depends on what your team specifically needs. Golisopod. Golisopod's pretty linear, I would say. It has access to close combat, so you can also use that. You can also use like another bug stab like Leech Life, or you can even use Knockoff to get rid of those nasty items, especially opposing heavy duty boots, because that's really annoying for Bug. But yeah, that's pretty much most of the stuff that it can run viably. It doesn't really run much else. It's still pretty much a hit and run Pokemon. You can use a choice band on it too if you want, but like getting rid of heavy duty boots is definitely not very good, especially since emergency exit is literally right there. So you probably still want to run like something like heavy duty boots, but you can run choice band and it does still do work, because Gliscod is still a pretty hit and run Pokemon, but it's just like, yeah. You can also drop spikes if you're not a fan of Hazard Stack. And you can like replace it with like not a setup move per se, but just like another coverage option. So like Knockoff, Leech Life, the moves I mentioned before. Now you might think that Bulk Up might be pretty decent on it, but like unlike Durant, it doesn't have the speed to actually support a setup set. I mean, you can try and experiment with it, but what you'll often find is that you'll try and set up, and then once the Pokemon in front of you dies, the next Pokemon comes in, and you literally can't do anything about it, because Aqua Jet is just not going to kill. Or they send in something that's resistant to Aqua Jet, and basically your entire Pokemon, because Water Bug is not super good as an offensive typing. So like you just get walled by Ferrothorn or something like that, and he just comes in and sits on you. It's really, really annoying. So that's why I wouldn't recommend bulk up sets, because they just kind of like allow dangerous things to come in and just wall your entire team, especially like Toxapex and stuff like that. That's really, really annoying. But Spikes allows you to gain a little bit of momentum and not really like suffer from that as much. But yeah, that's it for Gliscod. Next up we got Ribombee. Ribombee is probably the most linear Pokemon on this team, or on this type. Because literally all I can do is just run a Quiver Dance, Boom Blast, Bug Buzz, Psychic, maybe Stun Spore if you're really feeling risky. But not really risky, but just feel like a speed control. If you don't want to run like Thunder Wave on Galvantula, for example, and you want to like slow down people in the air, yeah, you can run Stun Spore on Ribombee. I use Psychic personally because I want to get rid of Toxapex because that mon is annoying, and I don't want to have to switch into Galvantula just to try and deal with it. So that's why I have Frybombi use Psychic, in my opinion. I think Psychic is way better than Stun Spore, and I feel like you should just use Thunderwave on Galvantula, but it's up to you. You can use Stun Spore if you don't like Thunderwave on Galvantula, that's perfectly fine. But yeah, that's pretty much all this mon runs. It doesn't run anything else. It literally does not run anything else. If you run anything else on this mon, you're kind of being ridiculous. Because Heavy Duty Boots, you could use a different ability, actually. You could use Sweet Veil over Shield Dust. I personally like Shield Dust for reasons I mentioned in the D-Rank Warriors video. But Sweet Veil is also very, very viable because it stops you from getting put to sleep, and that's very good in competitive Pokemon. So definitely not an ability you should look over. Other items, I really don't think this Pokemon can run any other items because Heavy Duty Boots is just so good for it. It allows it to basically come in on webs, spikes, Stealth Rock. It's just so good. There's no reason really not to use it. It just gives it so much utility. But if you wanted to use something else, you could use a Life Orb if you wanted, or even Expert Belt, but like, just use Heavy Duty Boots, man. It's literally like some of the best item for Bug. And it allows Ribombee to be so much more potent. So there's really no reason to just not use it. Just use it. But yeah, those are just the standard Pokemon on this type that you can like change up the sets for. There's like a bunch of different options you can do for the Pokemon on this type. So like let's go ahead and do that actually. Let's change up these sets. So for Shuckle, we'll give it Knockoff instead of Final Gambit because even though Final Gambit does give us a little bit more momentum, I feel that in certain matchups like Advanced Water with Dracovish, you want to like get rid of that item because it's very, very annoying. So I feel like Knockoff is definitely very good for that. Galvantula, Volt Switch, we already mentioned why we want to use that. Coil Centiscorch, I feel like we should keep this because being able to set up in front of steel types like Ferrothorn is still very good and very good. Durant, we're going to use Stomping Tantrum so we can hit electric types that get slowed down, because electric is becoming a little bit more popular, I found, so I kind of want to start covering for that matchup. Gliscopod is going to use the same set as it usually uses, except I'm going to drop Spikes for Leech Life, because I don't really need the additional Spike support. At least in my opinion, I don't feel like I need it. I feel like Rocks is just enough for this type to handle, and Gliscopod might be able to find opportunities to set up spikes, but it's not going to be very often. Especially from the amount of times I've used the type, I don't find it happens very often. But next up we have Ribombee, and Ribombee's just going to run the same thing. I'm going to have Psychic on this because I am not getting walled by Toxapex. But yeah, this already looks a little bit different from the sample team. Definitely a different take on it. It's not exactly the same. Still uses the same mods, but it's like almost a completely different team because of the different things that you use. So yeah, that's how you can make a team like non-standard, or at least not the sample team. But if you want to make a team truly non-standard, you have to use different Pokemon, and that's where this team will come in. So this team is actually not good, or at least not good as far as I'm aware right now, because it's still under testing. But it's a team with Frostmoth, so the idea behind this team was I wanted to use Frostmoth to be better against certain types like Dragon and not be able to run Ribombee. So, I think I talked about this in a previous video, but basically, I still don't really know if this mon is like good enough to replace Ribombee, and I don't really feel like it is, just from practice. So I'm probably going to end up like moving on to a different team for this, but basically the main idea was to be able to use Crustle, and I feel like we can accomplish that by doing something else. But yeah, that's an example of what not to do, because by getting rid of Ribombee, I'm forfeiting one of the best Pokemon on my team. And what do I get in return for it? Basically a Pokemon that can set up in front of fatter sweepers like Keldeo, which honestly is a pretty nice trade-off, but you could have just killed Keldeo with Ribombee in the first place, and it's still way faster and is way better typing, and that can actually be dangerous once they set up. Unlike this Pokemon, who can just get walled still and get outsped even under webs. So that's why I kind of feel like Ribombee is still a better choice. And while we do get to use Cressel, he's still pretty underwhelming, and it isn't enough to justify Ribombee's lack of presence. So we're just gonna scrap this team, and we're gonna go into this team instead. So this team still uses a lot of the same mons actually, but we use Araquanid instead of Golisopod, and Araquanid here actually helps us take care of a problem with bugs. So that's the main thing you want to do when you trying to make a different team, which is something I forgot to talk about in the video previously, but you have to have a goal in mind. You have to have a problem. What's a problem that Bug has? Bug gets swept a lot by fire types like Chandelure and basically any special attackers in general. That's why Frostmoth is C rank, because it helps with that a little bit, but also Araquanid helps a lot with that as well, thanks to its Assault Vest set. So Crunch is actually pretty bad because they only have it to hit Dragon Bolt specifically, but you can use but there's not really a lot of other moves you can use, especially with the Soul Vest. You could use Scald if you wanted to. But yeah, that's all I can think of personally. You can also use Ice Beam if you really wish. But yeah, Mirror Coat essentially allows you to beat out any special attackers that hit you. So like if a Keldeo is like spamming Scald against you, you basically click Mirror Coat and he gets, probably not O-Good, but he gets a big chunk of damage taken off of him. Same thing with Chandelure. If Chandelure tries to use Substitute against you, you click Liquidation. If they try to use a move against you, you basically Mirror Coat them and take their life for free. It's very, very good. With Hydreigon, I believe this move does hit Dark types, so I believe you do actually end up hitting Hydreigon with a really hard. So if they like try to drop a Draco against you and your Ribombee is down, you can just use a Araquanid to come in and Mirror Coat it back, and it will literally just take a kill every time. And if you try to be passive and use Substitute, you got Leech Life to stop that. So that's why I feel like Araquanid can actually work on this team, because it doesn't really set offensive momentum that much, because special attackers just literally cannot do anything. And it basically has Golisopod's stab combination, which is threatening in its own right. It's not good, but it's still threatening. Its fourth move could still be used to like further threaten another Pokemon, but I still don't know personally like what move I'd use. Like maybe Scald would probably be the best one, who knows? But right now, I feel like Araquanid is definitely a solid option to use on bug teams, especially on this one, because it's very well supported by it, because a lot of these mons do not beat special attackers very well. And basically getting rid of those special attackers is really, really good. Now, if only we had a mon that could take care of physical attackers too, that'd be great. Yeah, Araquanid is one of the few very good defensive, offensive mons that you can use on bug, in my opinion. And that's how you can make your team a little less standard. You have to have a problem, and you have to come up with a solution to the problem. Now, does Araquanid have flaws? Absolutely. It's slow, it's kind of useless in certain emus, just like Golisopod, and it doesn't even have hazards. And, it's super reliant on Assault Vest, and even with Assault Vest, it's still pretty weak. I mean, it's still pretty frail, so we might have to adjust the EV spread to fix that or whatever, but right now, I feel like Araquanid does have its flaws. Definitely slow and worthless in certain MUs, but in most MUs that I've used it in, it's still pretty good. But yes, this is a video specifically about Bug. I'll talk about some of the other Pokemon and like how they can fit on Bug teams. So we have a team here for Orbeetle. Now, Orbeetle is supported by Ribombee because you get rid of the Dark types, and I'm using the Stored Power set with Iron Defense and Body Press. So I actually have Magic Coat on my last on my last move. So you should be using Recover, in my opinion, because it allows you to get your health back in case people are like beating you down. And while Magic Coat does have a little bit of a niche in stopping taunt, it's not the best. So that's why I think you should be using Recover instead. But even in front of Taunters, you have like a bunch of other threatening offensive Pokemon that can just kind of beat it out. This plate is illegal now, so I have to. I'm just put E-Belt on this thing, honestly. But yeah, same sets. Not really much else is different. But yeah, that's just the nature of team building in Gen 8 anyway. It's just that you can't really like make a lot of whack options because unfortunately this meta is kind of restrictive with like the Pokemon you have to run, especially certain types. I feel like quite a few types in this generation are forced to run a few Mons, but that doesn't mean that you can't run like a few like niche options on those teams. It's just that you have to use a few. You are pretty much required to use a certain few amount of Pokemon in order to not lose to the majority of teams. And if you feel like that's not like the meta you want to play, go play Gen 6 or Gen 7 because those are way better metas that allow you to be more diverse. But for this metagame, you do have to abide by those rules and just have to kind of hold that. I just like stick with only being able to like adjust one slot for now, unless you're able to like come up with like a different archetype, for example. But yeah, Orbeetle is another example. This Pokemon just does its thing, destroys teams without a dark type once it gets set up. Probably shouldn't be minus in probably shouldn't be minus in that. Oh wait, this isn't even a combine set. Yeah, no, this was a body press, which is weird. Body press is also pretty good for dealing with those dark types actually, but I prefer the combine because I found that that's actually a lot better, and it just win cons a lot more matches. But yeah, you can also use the utility set that was mentioned in a previous video with a light screen, reflect, U-turn, and magic coat, I believe. Don't don't quote me on that, but yeah. Um, what other Pokemon? We already covered Vikavolt, so I guess let's take a look at the viability rankings. I think we talked about pretty much all these Pokemon in depth, so let's try and make an actual team with Cressel. So first of all, we're gonna absolutely have Shuckle and Durant on here because obviously those Pokemon are the best. All right, so we're gonna have Crustle. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Crustle. So Crustle here has Sturdy, and Sturdy can be supported by heavy-duty boots, which, excuse me, allows it to come in on rocks and basically take a hit for free, and basically set up for free, which is pretty good. Shell Smash is obviously the best set on this thing. Let's see what's next. So as I mentioned before, this thing does get Stone Edge, but as I also said, you would probably like to hit your, well, not that you want to hit your moves, you want to like hit substitutes and like break them. So you kind of want to do that. Let's see, Earthquake for coverage and X-Scissor to help complete your stab. And you want to be as fast as possible so you can outspeed anything under webs instead of as strong as possible. But if you this is also where the next resource comes in with speed tiers. So let's go look at our speed tiers right now. Let's go speed tiers. So let's take a look at Crustle. So Crustle after that should be 414. So, version 14, Crustle. So let's see what happens if we don't have plus speed in Crustle. So let's look for Crustle's name. So here we go. Crustle is right here, as opposed to right here. So it loses out on outspeeding Toxtricity, Dracovish, and Dracozolt. Dracovolt? Oh, that's weird. Misses out on outspeeding Noivern base, which is pretty important to outspeed. Misses out on outspeeding Ribombi base, Weavile base, Dragapult neutral. That Corviknight calc isn't really important. Misses out on outspeeding. Actually, these aren't relevant either because most of these Pokemon run Jolly, or at least plus speed. Outspeeding plus 2 Vigor Volt is pretty important. If you ever run into it, outspeeding Dragon Dance Gyarados after plus 1 is pretty important. These aren't relevant. Well, actually, after webs, outspeeding Cloyster is definitely important, for sure. Let's see. Cramorant, not really needed. Let's see, Barraskewda, it has to outspeed that at base form. Imagine not being able to outspeed that. That would be really sad. Let's see. Plus 1 Dracovish. Even without webs, it can still outspeed it. And yeah, that's the last thing it outspeeds. And also Excadrill, Choice Scarf Excadrill it outspeeds without webs. So yeah, those are all the things Crustle will literally miss out on outspeeding. So that's why we're going to use Jolly. Because we don't have checks to those aforementioned Pokemon that would otherwise not that would otherwise get swept by those Pokemon. So we're just going to use plus speed just so we don't lose to that. Because there's nothing worse than losing a game because you overlooked a speed tier. But yeah, what helps support this team right now? So we got two solid physical attackers. I think we would need a good special attacker to assist them. So we should, and also we need something that hits Dragon really hard because we are pretty weak to that type right now. So we must use Ribombi and just use the standard Quiver Dance set with Moonblast, Bug Buzz, Psychic, so we can take care of Toxapex. We're going to use Heavy Duty Boots. Alright. Also, Durant set is going to be a little bit different because now that we have Crustle to take care of the rock spam, we can actually afford to run Stomping Tantrum and also use the First Impression. And since we won't be using Gliscopon on this team, most likely, we might actually use a Choice Band in order to fulfill the need for a hit and run attacker, as we already have a few different sweepers on our hands, so we won't particularly need them that much. Being choice selected does suck though, so we might change that based on practice. But yeah, so now we actually have a pretty decent lineup of Pokemon. So let's take a look. What do we need to know? So what defensive options do we need to make sure we cover? So our team isn't super weak to fire, but we do need someone that can take care of steel for us, because Durant is going to get choice locked, and Mega Slash is going to be a real big pain to deal with on this team, especially since Crustle can't break steel types on its own. And Ribombi is not doing anything about that, so in order to circumvent this issue, we're going to be using Scent to Scorch, so that way Steel always has to lose them on. And because of this, I'll be using a Fire Lash set with Coil in order to bait out because Slash's King Shield, and we'll use Leech Life and Power Whip to fully complete our coverage. And use Heavy Duty Boots because Heavy Duty Boots are great. We want to outspeed as many things as possible, so we'll just use that. Boop. And now for our last Pokemon. So we finally have our team. We have a Durant, a Crustle, Ribombee, and Scorch, along with Shuckle. So Durant covers most of our coverage with hitting like Fairy types, Ice types. Crustle helps with Ice types and Flying types. Ribombee helps with Dragon types for the most part. And Scorch helps with Steel types. What type are we not really covering that much? I wonder. Oh, I think Water actually has a pretty good matchup against this team. It feels like we might just get absolutely destroyed by Water, actually, because even if we get rid of Toxapex, we still have to worry about Rain Sweepers, we have to worry about Rain Sweepers like Barraskewda sweeping us, and that's really, really bad. We also have to worry about Seismitoad coming in turn 1 and just setting Stealth Rock all over us. We need someone to actually, stop that. So let's go use Galvantula. We could also use Vikavolt, but I think Galvantula is a little bit more consistent at beating Water. So let's go pick up Galvantula, and since we're using this to make sure it beats Seismitoad, we're going to use E-Belt. So that way we can maximize the power of its Energy Ball. Now I also feel like Flying types kind of just sit on us, and I feel like especially Pokemon like Noivern can just click Hurricane for free for the most part, and there's not much we can really do about it to slow it down because it's in the air. So we'll put on Thunder Wave to actually punish that thing. Now, do we want Agility to sweep with Galvantula, or do we want to use a different move, like Disable, or maybe even Sticky Web, so we have a secondary sweep? We have a secondary Mon to set up webs, or we could even use Volt Switch to further pivot out. Except we really don't have that many hit and run Mons, so maybe Volt Switch isn't the best idea. So maybe Sticky Web or Agility will probably be the best one. I think probably Sticky Web would help us the most, since we don't really have someone that can really prevent defog that much. And also, Galvantula scares out most of defoggers anyway, thanks to Thunder Wave plus Thunder. So yeah, there we go. There's our non-orthodox team. For the most part, I'm pretty sure this team will do pretty well, because it does follow a lot of their same standard stuff, but it also just doesn't, it also just isn't being ridiculous and just using arbitrary mons just for the sake of using arbitrary mons. But yeah, that, my friends, is how you actually create a really solid team without following, like, the normal, or at least, like, being a meta slave, let's say. Now, you may think that this team still looks kind of standard, and unfortunately, most teams are going to look standard, but they won't play standard, and their sets won't be standard. And some Pokemon are going to look the same whether you like it or not, but the more you realize that being unique isn't the end-all be-all. Like, being unique is good, and having different sets is good, but you have to make sure that it's actually good and not just arbitrary. And I already explained why all the Pokemon on this team aren't arbitrary. Each of them serves a very important role on this hyper-offensive archetype. So that's why we actually have a very solid team. And there you go. So if you skipped all the way to the end of the video just to see like the entire team, then good on you for trying to see this. But try and like watch the rest of this to make sure you actually figure out like what the thought process was and why I actually came to this conclusion that we need to make a team with Crustle. Because Crustle does offer me a lot of things, and I won't explain it again just to not bore you. But yes, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it's a long one, but this is a very, very helpful guide, and I hope you guys find this useful for building your own teams. Just follow the same logic I follow. Use the viability ranks as your best resource. Make sure you don't look over things. Make sure you use all of your resources. If you want to differ from the sample team, make sure you do it effectively, and make sure you know how each and every single Pokemon is used. You don't want to just use arbitrary Pokemon just for the sake of it. Do not use Excavalier just because you don't like Durant. Make sure you have a good reason for using the Pokemon you do. Make sure your niche that you have for that Pokemon is actually useful. And problem solve instead of just using arbitrary mons just to use arbitrary mons. Use Crustle because you know it can help with the flying matchup, it can help break subs, and it can help be a very potent sweeper that Bug otherwise just does not have access to. Make sure you mention how using Thunder Wave on Galvantula actually helps the type more than using Stun Spore on Ribombee because of its more consistent nature. You have to have a reason for why you run these sets. And if you ever have a question, always go to the monotype room and ask for help, because no one there is going to fight you on your sets. So, without further ado, enjoy the rest of your day, guys.